Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Monday night's edition of Behind the Scenes. My name is Dennis C. I'll be your host for the next hour. I'd like to think that this is our opportunity to use that extra hour of daylight savings, unless you're from most parts of Arizona. But if you thought you already used it in your mind, tell us in the chat how you used that hour this weekend. Otherwise, welcome. I think we're in for a real treat today. I'm going to geek out for a moment and say, listen, I've taught this test for over 13 years, and today we have an opportunity to speak to someone truly behind the scenes, and I'm talking about the senior director of assessment design, essentially someone who is absolutely in charge of making sure that this test is created in the way that they envision it to, and make sure that it does the things that they want. So I'd like to welcome Sara Vispoel to join us, and let us know in the chat. Sara, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. It looks like you're still hard at work.
I'm telling you, I'm coming from you from the inner sanctum here in Iowa City. Right out there are people busily working away, making up tests. So I'm telling you,
can we zoom in on those papers behind you? Do those have answers?
No, can't. Absolutely not. Can't. It's top secret. Not really. Anyway, no, it's a
you
pleasure.
Might have seen. It's great having you. I mean, if you might have seen on the slide right before, we had a little quick true or false there, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. ACT exams administered in December are easier than other ACT exams administered throughout the year. Definitely let us know if you have a true or false answer to that. We'll cover that for sure later today. And maybe we can get you to talk a little bit more about some of the cheating scandals that I've heard whispers about, Sara, if we have time, right? So
cheating scandals? What cheating scandals?
I don't know. Maybe we'll get to it. Yeah. So if you are interested in any of that, tell us in the chat.
For sure.
We want to make this hour as much about you as possible. You have a really unique opportunity here to talk to someone who is absolutely ingrained in the creation and just knows everything about everything in regards to the ACT. So let us know what you're thinking and how we can support you. But Sara, again, welcome. I know I got a ton of questions. Are you ready? Are you ready to?
Yeah, I sure am. And again, thanks for the intro. I have been at ACT for a while, and I was actually a high school biology teacher. Loved it. Didn't exactly love standardized tests, though, to be honest. Did not like them very much at all. In fact, my students, I'm thinking, I know my students better than this other company or what have you. And in fact, when people found out I worked at ACT, they thought of a particular reference that I have a slide that kind of captures.
Are we talking about seeing you hard at work? Is that the picture we're going to share here?
Right.
That's you, right?
That's what everyone, I'm telling you, all my teachers, all my students, all my friends, all my teacher friends thought you went to the dark side, right? But actually, it's a little bit more than that. I had gone back to grad school and got my PhD in educational measurement and statistics. If you've ever heard of that, a psychometrician. So some people like to say, I put the psycho in the psychometrician, but that would not be a cool thing to say. So I won't. Anyway, point being, it's about measuring people, measuring things and stuff like that. So again, I learned a lot more about standardized tests and what they're used for. So again, hopefully this time gives you the chance to ask questions. I mean, like, I have been here for 16 years. I have been in charge of the ACT. I've taken about every form there is. I can answer all your questions. So if you have any, please, again, I know Dennis said interrupt us or put them on the chat. We're happy to answer those. But the first question I had, go ahead, Dennis. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, let's throw that back up there. Let's get that out of the way.
Because I have a question for you. And
sure, go ahead.
That point being, people know, the only thing they seem to know about standardized tests is how much they hate them. It's like, so what do you think about when you think about what is a standardized test? I just put up some options here about what do you think the actual answer is, like a standard purpose, standard environment, used to make formal decisions, or use that standard answer format. So I wonder what people think about
we'll get
that.
some responses in here, because I definitely want to hear from folks, because I agree with you. I think it's a great question to start with, because I think a lot of times we have students say, oh, I hate these tests, or I hate these tests. And I hear a lot of different reasons why these tests are important, why they are, and please absolutely use the poll. You can chat in, but absolutely use the poll to chime in as well, because we want to get a sense of just from the entire group what you all are thinking. But yeah, I mean, tell me, Sarah, what should be the answer that we should give here? What is the best way to describe and define for the rest of this time we have together what a standardized test means?
And a standardized test actually has a really specific answer. So I see that most people gave the A response, which I can't, which one was that again? Was that?
It was
standard
test
purpose?
Developed for standard purpose.
Yeah, because I put this word standard there. Actually, a standardized test is a test given in standardized conditions. So it's kind of B would be the answer there. So what we know is that the question is, well, what does that mean, right? What does standardized conditions mean? And why is that important? And if you think about it, it's kind of like a science experiment, right? If you have say you have a weight loss drug or something like that, and you have conditions, you can't have one condition vary too much from the other, right? Otherwise, you can't compare results. For example, you couldn't test out a weight loss drug at a place where you have to jog 2 miles to get there, right? Versus the other one is tested in a place in the back of a Dairy Queen. That wouldn't be wise, right? You can't compare those results. Standardized conditions is what a standardized test is talking about. So it's not about a Scantron. If you think about it, you could do an interview in standardized conditions, right? The point being, everybody has the same situation. It's not like one group has a calculator and one group doesn't, or something like that, right? So the power there is it allows people to make comparisons. If you don't have those conditions, then things get messy. So things like grades, which are really important, sometimes, I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but maybe there's a geometry teacher that grades a little bit differently than another one. I don't know if you've ever had that situation where, say, somebody got a better grade than you did, and you're like, wait a minute, what did you have to do for your grade? Well, this standardized test takes all that out of the equation and gives you a standardized experience.
That makes a lot of sense. And you know, something we talked about earlier was, I mean, not earlier today, but earlier when we met, was also the test taking conditions as well, right?
Yes.
Because we have students who take practice tests at home all the time and wonder why their test goes up and down. But there's so many factors that go into how you perform on a test. And so as much as you can, that's why you have, as you know, all the students take the test at the same time if possible, in the same types of conditions, right?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. It feels maybe kind of foreign, and actually all we're trying to do is make it as clear and concise and fair for everybody as we possibly can. So you know the time, you have the situation, you know, you have a calculator, you've seen these things. Again, the more practice you have, that can get you familiar with the format. But point being that we want to make things as clear and easy as possible, believe it or not. I think a lot of people think that we try to come up with some trick questions, which we'll kind of talk about again. But that standardized test, you know, you wonder, like, why do they need it? Well, if, like, for example, at UCLA, there's an admissions example that they gave us that there's like 47,000 applicants, and 21,000 of them have a GPA of 4.0.
Wow.
So how are you going to choose? So again, it can be one measure that can be helpful for something like admissions decisions.
Let's get back to that. Before we do though, I want to take care and knock out some of these other myths that I've written down from students over the years. I'd love if you could tackle some of them. So I've always been curious, you know, we joked about the dark side already. And I think I saw one of your minions walking by just a moment ago.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But who writes these questions, Sarah? Right? Is it a big computer that you guys have programmed? Is it, you know, these test makers for hire? I've always been curious who actually makes these questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually had a similar thought for the group to think about like, what are the requirements for someone who writes these tests, and what kind of things do we ask for? And so this was just another one of these questions I put up about what would you predict are the minimum requirements for somebody who writes for the ACT? Who are these people? They have bachelor's degrees? Are they technical writers? Do they have to be teachers or what? And so I'm just going to go ahead and go to the slide that kind of shows that actually, next one over, that we're working with actual teachers. So this slide shows you that you have to have item writers and teachers that are actually teaching at the level like at the grade in the course that the test is about. So you'll notice this one has item writers, and you can see how many steps you have to go through to get a question. So the item writers are teachers. See that T there? So they start off with item writers. Teachers write stuff in. They have ideas about things, and they work with our test development staff who are in the middle. And our test development staff make those questions more accessible to everyone. So say, for example, we have an item writer from Iowa or something that writes a really cool math question, but it's about a silo or something that maybe students from all over the country don't know. So we take it and like, oh, well, we can change that. It's a great idea, but let's frame it up so it's accessible to everybody. Then you'll see there's another set of, after that question goes there, then it goes to content reviewers, which means there's another group of teachers, fairness reviewers, another group of teachers that look at the question. These things, they go through and make sure everything is easy, clear, correct. When I say easy, I mean not tricky. Things that they'd ask in their class.
So if I'm reading this carefully or trying to understand it better, how many times, I saw you had a question up earlier too, how many times a question changes hands before it gets put into the system? How many times?
So yeah, we had that slide up there. If you had to predict, you can see on this particular slide, it shows that there's a lot of different handoffs between tryouts and administrations and things. And it's actually about 16 times that a question is going to change hands before it actually goes on to where a student will see it, let alone if it counts for their score. So that just gives you, it's extremely important that everything be crystal clear about that question. So, and you think, what's the big deal? Like, how can questions be weird? Well, I have a couple of examples of some questions that might come in that have problems associated with them. So we'll see if people want to check out like what's wrong with this particular example for a math question. So when I put up a question like this, clearly I'm saying there's something that's not ideal about this question. So let's take a look. I can be a test developer for a minute here. As you look at this question, so which of the following expressions has a value of 4 when x equals -3? So we have all those answers there. And I guess the question I'd ask of you is, what does a student have to do to answer that question?
They just got to plug it in.
So where would they plug it in?
They would plug -3 for all the variables of x.
So, right, so they do it in A, and they might do it again in B, and then they have to do it again in C, and they have to do it. Okay, so as we see here, the problem is that you're doing this same skill 5 times.
Yeah.
And we don't want that. That's a problem with that question. So as the what we would do is if this came in from a question writer, we would change it, and we go to the next slide there. You can see the next example. How we change the question is to be something like this. So you'll see the student is demonstrating that they can plug in a -3, but they only have to do it once. And they can kind of see what that answer is. Does that make sense?
That makes a ton of sense. That makes a ton of sense. So would it be as far to say when you do see something like the first example, you can almost, maybe we're getting a little too deep, but as a student, could you almost assume if you are plugging in -3 5 times, you're probably not doing it the way the question is designed. You're probably doing it the long way. Is that an okay way of saying
Well, I wouldn't want students to over rely that. I mean, there are multiple ways to solve math questions. We know that. Like, so people do it different ways. This was just mainly trying to be an example of one of the things we try to do to be more efficient when our goal is to measure that particular skill. So there might be questions that are in a context or something, but I think the take-home message here is we're trying to measure a skill, we're trying to make it, and the wording is really important. And I would like to go into that next example to tell you about this. A lot of times students say, oh, you word things so you word in such a tricky way, right? It's so funky how you word things. How come you don't say things more clearly? So this is an example of something that might come our way. And it has a very big problem with it. We could never use this on the ACT. So let's look through here. And this is again, an exaggerated example. But here we go. We can see this tank and it's water. Everybody loves like, hey, story problems. Yay. So can't wait. The valve's open, the tank drains 500 gallons per hour. Approximately how many gallons of water will the tank contain 1 hour and 20 minutes after the valve is opened? And then you see those the answers there. So there's something here that makes us really nervous about a question like that. So I don't know if you can tell what that might be.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the big flag would be all these answer choices are really close to each other, but you've got the word approximately in here.
So that's the problem. Is they are so close together. So a student could say, well, any of these are approximately correct, right? So we can't have words like approximately paired with things that are that close together when you're talking about 12,800 gallons of water, right? So again, just getting back to the wording, when you see wording on an ACT question and it says in a coordinate plane or what have you, all we're trying to do there is make it so there's one clear, correct answer. There's no ambiguity, and so that's what that's trying to get at. Is again, we're not trying to be tricky. It's trying to be straightforward and make sure there's only one clear, correct answer.
Again, I want to tell everyone in the audience, if you want to ask questions, definitely do so. We will hit upon them all throughout today's time together. As a follow-up, Sarah, but that doesn't mean we want students to be trying to hunt down mistakes that the ACT has made. I mean, the point you're trying to make is if it changes hands 16 times, unlikely you're going to see these kinds of examples. You're mostly showing things that have already been rooted out as part of the creation process. Correct?
That is exactly right. And you would not want to spend your time trying to find things like, oh, is there something wrong with this question? You will waste your time, like you said. And that's a big part of how we spend our time, is to make sure there is one clear best answer.
Can I give you another flag then? Because I definitely have heard rumors of things like, and not to point fingers in any way, but when we think about this test and we think about how different groups perform on it, particularly in terms of bias, right? How can you speak to that a little bit? Like, is that also something the ACT looks at? Like how maybe females might perform on a question versus males? Is that something that's checked?
Yes, actually it is. That's one of the different things as we look at test questions. So there's a thing called differential item functioning. DIF is if you want to look it up. And it is basically a way of looking at how students do on particular questions. So just like you were saying, look at how different subgroups do. So say, for example, we have a test and look at all the students who got, the ACT has a score of 1 to 36. Look at all the students who got a 30 on the ACT. And what we do is let's look at all the females, and what we notice is all the females got number 8 wrong. Okay, that doesn't make sense. Or high proportion of those females, that subgroup, even though they got 30 overall, they got that question wrong. You can see that question is not performing equally well across the subgroups. And so we do analyses of these, of different kinds of subgroups, to make sure that all the questions, there's no subgroup that's disadvantaged. Does that make sense? So if there's 30, yeah, some of them get it right, some get it wrong, but it's not so clear that like all the females get it wrong. Like maybe that was something about a sport or something that they're unfamiliar with or something. So that routinely is done. And if we find a question that has that diff, and there's different grades of diff, there's A diff, B diff, C diff. C is bad. If there's something like that, then we get rid of the question. The 16 times, that's part of what we look for ahead of time, but we also look afterwards. After students take a test, we try to put the best things together, but then afterwards we take really close care to see, make sure that all the questions are working the way they should.
So, okay, I'm just trying to connect the dots here. I love that. Thank you for the response. It's always something I've been curious about. So far for the students here and for the teachers who are here to share this information in the future with your students, welcome. So far what I'm hearing is, look, no one's out to get you. This test is designed to be a standardized conditions. It's supposed to be a science experiment. It's supposed to give universities another data point to use as part of their admissions process. And we should trust from the dark side leader that there's 16 touch points in each question creation. I want to actually go into that a little bit more. I'm actually really interested about what that means, what those 16 touch points entail, and also that you are constantly looking at this diff, whether it's A, B, or C, to really kind of figure out, is this test performing in the way that you'd like it to? Does that kind of sum up so far what we got?
That does, and again, to my teacher colleagues, one of the things that I also wanted to drive home is the importance of teachers. If you look at those 16 steps of how many are done by or to reviewed, and the 16 steps that go into an ACT question, most of them have to do with real teachers who are practicing. We don't hire technical writers that are outside of their content area like a lot of testing companies do. Like there's a lot of really good English English majors who write really well, and so then they write their math questions. We do not do it that way. We have a staff of over 100 subject matter experts at their grade level that have mainly at least master's degrees, a lot of PhDs around here in their area who have taught or currently recently taught. And then we work with actual groups of teachers out in the community to across the United States to review questions, to go over them, to make sure they're fair. And then as we put collections of questions together to make like a math test, we have them look again and say, if there's anything wrong, we take it out, throw it out. And then even after it's given, like you said, statistically, we're looking at them to make sure they operate the way they should.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I will say I am aware of tests that use algorithms to create their question pools. So to me, that explains a lot to me. I do think, ACT has always felt very practical in terms of how the questions test certain concepts. So, and I think that what you're saying makes sense in terms of the output of what the test questions are like. We got a question come in from I guess, somewhat anonymous guest. I would love to hear your thoughts. Is time management something that's considered? Is that something? I'd love to hear if that's part of the equation at all.
That is absolutely part of what we look at. So when we have teachers reviewing questions to see whether or not this is a high quality enough question to put on a test, how long a student would take to answer the question is something that people need to consider. So we ask our reviewers to consider it. We ask our reviewers to put themselves in a mind of a student and how long they would take. We don't want to have a question that's so long that it or complex that it takes too much time. So that is one of the things that we look for and review for. We don't allow those questions on there if they would take too much time.
Yeah, cool. I want to dive into that further, but before we do, I have one other thing that I'd love for you to touch on. This is a big one for me. I think a lot of our students take the time to prepare for the ACT because I think everyone knows what doors it can open for them in the admissions process. But more and more, we are seeing a trend of schools making the test optional. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this kind of opt-out trend, or just even the sentiment that opting out might be an option, especially for someone who has put so much of your career and work into designing and trying to make this test as fair as possible. Well, yeah. Any thoughts you'd say?
Absolutely. And again, just for your background, the ACT is a not-for-profit organization. That's why I work here. I wouldn't otherwise. Education's where my heart is, and I want to open doors for students, not the other way around. But so when it comes to opt-out, that I understand where the sentiment comes from, right? There's not students who don't feel like, oh, you know what, I don't do as well. So maybe there's been some people who said, you know what, maybe just go to a school where they don't require it. And so don't even take it because just don't, because it just avoids that whole thing, and just go on your grades and some other things. That's certainly an option. However, what I would want to warn students is be aware, just because a particular organization says that they don't use and require an ACT or an SAT score to get in, many of them require an ACT or SAT score or a standardized test score of some sort, at least, to qualify for certain kinds of scholarships. They can use them for like admissions to dental school, medical school, some of those advanced kinds of programs, they require a score. So the problem is a student goes in and says, oh, I'm not going to take it because I just want to opt out. you might have just opted out of your capability to earn a scholarship or get into some of those advanced programs. So again, look into it, what have you, but just be very careful. Don't just look at the admissions decision, but look at the follow-ups. And what you might find is it's worth taking.
Yeah, and actually, I want to stay on that for a beat more longer because we had some very, in my opinion, exciting and interesting news come out from the ACT recently. I don't know if everyone, I'm hoping everyone here has heard this already, but do you want to talk a little bit about the digital ACT and some of the policy changes that were announced recently? I'd love to.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a few changes coming for the ACT, as you mentioned. Having the ACT being able to take the test online is something that's coming. So there's a
And when we say online, just to clarify, it's not in your own home. You'd have to go to a test center, but you still
that's
have
right.
this flexibility of not having to take it at a specific date. Is that right?
Well, you have to do it on a specific date. So thanks for asking that question. But you're able to take it on the computer. So on a national test date. We already do that in states. So a lot of students may already say, oh, hey, I already do this. But nationally, we have not been able to offer that, but now we do. So you can take, again, the ACT, the regular or the ACT with writing that will be coming. And being able to take that online.
And what kind of student would find that as an advantage? Like why even make that an option? You know, is that just because that's the trend of, you know, Gen Z's being more comfortable being with using the computer? Is that what it is? Or
yeah, we certainly want to emulate what goes on in classrooms. That's the other thing. We want to make things as similar to the learning environment as possible. And we know that a lot of students are taking tests online now. There are students that tend to like one or the other. Some really like that ability to click around, get questions back to see what to review them. Oh, I flagged that one for review. Other students, quite frankly, prefer paper. So we have both options. We're not getting rid of paper, but it's just offering that on the computer. I think I would have thought that most students like to type the writing test. When I write, I know I like to write at a keyboard. And so but what we're finding actually is a lot of students actually say, no, you know what, I'd rather write my writing test. So it just depends on the person. But we want those options out there so students can do what feels most comfortable for them. That's ideal.
That way, as you said earlier, it's not all about the phone environment. You get to be in the environment that's most comfortable. Is that the way you're?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And then what about the big implication of super scoring then? How does that play out? Because I know that's been by school in the past, and now that's changing as well. Is that
right? So what we mean by super scoring is that, say, for example, and this has gone on for a long time, that is, you take the ACT once, and you say you didn't quite get the score you wanted, so you take it again. And so super scoring means you take your top performance on the English test, the math test, the reading test, the science test, the writing test, and you only take those top ones. Like, say I did this one better, but I did this one better here, I did this one better there, and you put it onto one score. So then it's what's called a super score kind of report. Well, the big difference that's coming up for us is that we will be offering the ACT with a section retest. So although students have always they've taken tests again, like the whole test over again, what this will allow them to do is say, you know what, it was just the science test that I didn't do so well on. So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to take the science test this time. And so they can put together all their other top scores, but then that better science score, and then that would be a super score. And you will have to depend on look into which universities you're talking about, whether or not the super score is accepted or not. But what we've heard is that schools are interested in it, and we're calculating that, so that would be an option for students. So that's a really exciting development.
That is. I mean, I've heard of students doing that, but like literally just wasting their time on the other sections. Now, again, this is just about students feeling comfortable, being able to perform to the best of their ability. So again, they can open doors. They can shine as best as they can with the familiarity of what they know about the test.
And it kind of shines a light on the science that goes behind the ACT and making sure that things are rock solid. And so, sometimes people ask us about, how do you know you're really measuring what you say you measure? How do we really know if we're measuring math or we're measuring something? And I did want to kind of quick show some of the kind of science that we do here at ACT and some of the experiments that we do. to make sure that we're measuring things. So this one is an example, and this is an eye tracking data example. So if you see on there, you see the question, and then you see all this green and yellow stuff.
Whoa. You're tracking my eyes right now, Sarah? Is that what's happening?
I could be.
I'm
You don't
kidding.
know. So if you look on there, so that green stuff, that's where people are looking. The red places are where people are looking the most. They're gazing there for a long time. Yellow and red are where they're gazing there the most. So if we look at this particular question, these are the eye tracking results of people who tended to get the question correct. Now, this particular question is about interpreting a graphic. So if we look at the notes, we can see, what are they looking at? Let's look and see. We've labeled, they are reading that legend. So you can kind of see that first box there. They need the legend to answer the question. Excuse me, they're also looking, if you look in the diagram, you can see they have to interpret the graphic and locate that answer to get the answer correct. So that's the correct responders. Now, before we show anything, we think, what would the incorrect responders look at? If we're truly measuring, interpreting a graphic, then we should be able to see that incorrect responders' graphs would not look the same as correct. And in fact, we see this difference. Check out the legend. They didn't even look at it.
Makes a ton of sense. I mean, we talk about this all the time, as getting the right answer to the wrong question.
So they're hunting for words, but it's a really cool thing here at ACT, because now we can share, not only do we have additional evidence for measuring, interpreting a graphic, but we can tell teachers, hey, what we're seeing is students got this question wrong because they're not looking at the legend. So please make sure when you're talking about interpreting graphics and you're looking at science questions, make sure your students remember and understand the importance of things like the legend. We have one other example just because I think it's cool.
It is super cool. Please.
So,
share 10
so
more
here's
examples.
another one where we're saying we're measuring that we are measuring whether or not students are able to use more than one bit of data to answer the question. So here we have those correct responders. Again, they're reading that question, obviously, but there are two tables here. And we can see that they tend to look and focus in, and they're looking at both tables.
I can already guess.
And if you think, I know, right? If you think about the incorrect responders, where are they gonna look? Let's just see if your question. So yeah, they're looking at the question, they're searching, but they did not even look at table 2. So again, it's additional evidence that we're measuring what we think we do. And so these are the kinds of experiments that are going on. We have eye tracking data, or eye tracking studies going for the next 2 months. Just to make sure that we're measuring what we think we're measuring. So that's kind of some of that extra data that we do to make sure that the science behind the ACT is solid.
I'll just throw in here, the last time we did one of these webinars, we talked about, with one of your colleagues, the importance of social emotional learning. And one of the concepts that we covered extensively was the ability to just have a growth mindset, to engage with questions you got wrong. And I think that example, I mean, you may not be able to track your own gaze at home with what, I mean, maybe soon, maybe that will be a possibility too. Yeah. But point I want to make is that you have to dive into questions you've done and understand and review why you got it right or why you got it wrong. Probably even more important to look at the ones you got wrong, because you want to be able to see what is the path you took that didn't align with the path to the answer that you needed. So I think that's a great example of how students can get more comfortable with the questions that they're going to be asked to do on test day. So that's awesome.
Sharing those things back out with teachers again to see what kinds of things we're finding and what kind of things students are stumbling on.
Okay, so, let me ask you a question point blank then, Sarah, because like you're sharing this and I get it. I'm picking what you're putting down, You're saying it's all about fair. It's all about making sure students can perform to the best of their ability. So are you really telling me no trick questions on the test? Like, is that just not, you don't throw in questions and you laugh maniacally before you go home at night because you've just been able to fool entire generation of students? No?
That would be the worst. That we don't want that at all. That is considered error. That's not what we're measuring. We don't want to measure, get anything tricky. And again, I think sometimes the wording can come across as a little weird. All we're trying to do is make it so that it's clear. There's only one, like I said, there's one best answer. So don't think we're trying to trick you. We're not trying to trick you. Never trying to trick you. That's never the goal.
I hope I'm not the only one who's having so much. I mean, I hope you're having fun, Sarah. I'm having a lot of fun. It's great having you here. I've got so many more questions to ask you. You ready? I've got an entire list.
Bring it. Yeah.
And again, to the audience, if you want to stop hearing my questions and you want to hear your questions, just type them in. You know, as much as I want to hear the answers to mine, this is about all of you. So let us know what kind of questions you had. Going back, I did see one that maybe you can touch upon for a second. It was about the essay. And I think it was a little bit earlier than when you brought up the preference to write it by hand or the preference to type it up. Any just big takeaways around the essay that you want to share?
Sure. Yeah. So the ACT writing test is an optional test. So you may or may not choose to take that particular test. The question about like how it's scored, and there are rubrics that I'm sure that they are available on the web. They're available so you can see what kinds of things are associated with high quality scores. And I would definitely suggest reviewing those, practicing those, that kind of thing. As far as how it's standardized, again, standardized conditions, standardized scoring. We have people who go over those scores, make sure that we're scoring the same way. There's papers that are fed through that kind of make sure that everybody's still getting the correct score. Like there's not one group that's scoring something that would get a higher score than another. So there's all sorts of auditing going on and understanding around that rubric and making sure that, again, things are scored in an equitable way. I think as far as whether or not people should take it, it's definitely something I think you want to look into the university of your choice and see if that's something that they encourage you to do. It is optional, so it does not affect your overall composite score. But if it's something that you think, it's basically a standardized writing sample, because the thing, put yourself in the hands of a university admissions person. If somebody hands in something saying, hey, look at my writing, they don't know who wrote it. So this writing test gives you a chance to formulate your question, formulate your answers, and gives them an example of something that they can use for looking to see like a placement decision or admissions decisions.
Makes a lot of sense. And I would say from an improvement standpoint, I don't tell, and let me know if this sounds right, I don't tell students to write tons of essays to improve on it. What I encourage them to do though is outline what they would write, because I think that's sometimes the biggest challenge for students, really being able to organize how they're going to go about it. If you just try to freestyle it from the get-go, it can be very challenging to get all your thoughts together in a coherent way. So I always encourage students, the more you pre-plan, the less you'll get stuck during the allotted time that you have. And instead you'll be able to put together a very clear, direct response to whatever's being asked in the writing sample. So, I know you're looking at the next question that we got here. So
yeah, and I'm happy to take that question.
Yeah, okay.
There's a question in the chat. Yeah, if you want to paraphrase or what have you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It kind of ties back into kind of what I was getting at. What is the ACT testing is the question that's come up, right? Is it knowledge? Is it preparation? Is it understanding? It's a great question, and I'd love to hear your answer, Sarah.
So, and so that one of the things is G, right? G is considered overall intelligence, and so there's people have the G factor. You put in the test data, and a lot of times people say, "Oh, that's just G." Well, again, we know that here at ACT, and we are very careful to design our questions to measure what we want them to measure. What are we measuring? As you mentioned, readiness. How do we know what we're talking about is what's most important for students to be able to be ready? Is we do a study called the National Curriculum Survey, where we get tens of thousands of responses from post-secondary instructors all over the country. We ask them a basic question: what do students need to know? What do they have to have down cold in order to be successful in your classroom? And we ask questions about things that we are currently on the ACT. We ask questions about things that are not currently on the ACT. And so that we can make sure that the things that we hit are things that are most important for readiness. So that's one of the studies we use. We also use that study to make sure we ask K through 12 instructors the same thing, except we also ask them, how do you teach this stuff in your class? When do you teach it? And so that we can make sure that our tests align with state standards and align with what was going on in classrooms. So that's, we're not, our entire company was founded by E.F. Lindquist, who was all about achievement. You talked about the growth mindset. This entire company came out of a response from other companies who were using aptitude. And our founder said, you know what, there are a lot of students who have aptitude, but they work hard, and they can work harder, and they can be just as successful, if not more successful, than someone who happens to have a high IQ, so to speak. So we're all about achievement, growth, and measuring what's most important.
It makes I love that we got that question, because I love the way that you presented that, Sarah. For me, what I took away as a student was simply that this is a test that is designed for me to improve on. Is that fair to say? Like, it's not a test that's locked in. It's one that if I prepare for, I can find myself getting to new levels of scores that I may not have thought possible. Is that a fair way to frame it?
I think what our research is clear on is taking rigorous courses really helps you with ACT scores. So the more you're in school, the more you're learning, the more you're doing learning activities, and again, and being just familiar with the ACT for sure, the better you'll do. And we have research behind that.
That's great. Can we talk about scoring a little bit? I know there's some tips, ask questions for tips for time management coming in, but I've always been curious how that scoring happens. What is it? Is it scaled? Is it curving? I know you're going to yell at me for using that word, but
no,
do you want to talk a little bit about the different ways that people understand scoring on the ACT and shed some light there?
Yeah, so it's one of the things I just wanted to kind of touch on a bit is you'll notice that we do have this 1 to 36. And that's not, you'll notice none of our questions our tests are 36 questions long. It's like, why do you do that? Why don't we do just things like you got 45 out of 50 or what have you, or 45 out of 60 on the math test? Well, there are problems with using raw scores, which that is just a number correct that you got. So say, for example, you take a geometry quiz and you get 9 out of 10, and I take a geometry quiz, a different form of it, and I get 4 out of 10. Who's better at geometry? Well, we don't know, because maybe your form was easier. You had easier questions than I did. So the ACT and other scaled tests go through a process of making sure that if students get the harder questions, that fewer students get correct, that when it comes down to making their raw score, how many correct they have, to the 36 scale conversion, that is taken care of, that's accounted for. So it doesn't matter which form you get, you're going to do as well. Like you don't have to worry about getting a harder form, because they're all equated. That's all taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about that.
So 2 questions then.
Yeah.
First question, could everyone get a perfect score then? That's why I thought you'd yell at me about using the word curving.
No,
it's not about best to worst. Everyone could get a top score,
because
right?
like in most of your classes, it just depends on the people around you, and there's X amount get A's and B's and C's. The ACT, any Saturday, everybody could get a 36 if they wanted to. Though it's already converted, has nothing to do with the people around you and how well they do. All that has been taken care of. Again, we have people with PhDs around here that spend a lot of time and a lot of data making sure that those things are taken care of and put in place. And that's one of the reasons it does take quite a bit of time and effort. And that's why I think a lot of in schools, my teacher colleagues don't have time to do, or the data to do things like equating. They have different ways of doing grading and things like that. But that's one thing with the ACT. That's one of the questions on is it better to take it in December?
Yeah, that was the question we asked at the beginning of the
because
session,
I hear people that aren't as capable take it in February or something like that. Well, that's not the case. What state, it doesn't matter. The only thing that one might say is, the more education you have, the better you might do. So, but other than that, all the forms are equated before you get there. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you're taking it whenever, or if the people around you have no effect on that whatsoever.
Yeah, thanks. That definitely answers the question I had. So again, I think what that means for me as a student is, look, it's not about, you can't game it in terms of which test date you take. You just take it when you're the most ready. And the plug that I'll throw out there before the end of the session as well is that the deadline that we have coming up for the December test is November 8th for the December 14th test date without penalty. So if you guys are looking into figuring out when it is that you can take this exam, that's, the December test may not be easier, but it still may be a really great opportunity for you to be able to get a score that will open the doors that you need. But great, awesome. So let's get back to it then. There was a question here about tips for time management, and I'll throw something out here. For me, it's all about practice, and it's all about getting more comfortable and confident with the test itself. So for me, when I'm kind of going through problems with students in class, the biggest thing that I want them to remember is that it's about having no surprises on the ACT itself. And what I try to express that is like, you're not studying or practicing to get smarter per se. You're going through these practice problems because you want to get there and be able to perform to the best of your ability without being surprised by the wording or anything that you might not be familiar with. What do you think about that, Sarah? Is that a good way to put it?
I think that makes a lot of sense to me. One thing I guess I would point out too is that all of the questions count equally. So it's not like if you see a question that looks kind of complicated and things like that, it is not going to have more weight than a different question. They all, just the number correct is all. That's that equating thing I talked about. It's like, so if you're struggling with the question and something's too complicated, you got to watch your time. Don't get too bogged down. And it varies with the test. Like for example, in math, it's 60 items in 60 minutes. So about a minute a question. If you find yourself really getting stuck, it's going to be better for you to move on, have more time for those other questions, because it's not like one question gets more score, more signal than the other ones. So again, get through, do your best, eliminate things that you know are wrong, and come back to it when you're able to.
Makes a lot of sense. And something I always share is like that triage process is so important. I like a lot of our teachers, we call it the 3-pass approach, meaning don't get stuck in gladiator mode, which is that's what I call it. When a student gets to the test, they see a question that they can't answer and they kind of freak out. And I know if any students have been in that situation where all of a sudden it becomes like a life or death situation. It's
so
either
gladiators,
you or the question.
Gladiators freak out. What's the, like, all I can think of is like,
I mean, they get to the point where, hey, keep your lightsaber on the wraps.
Okay,
it's not nighttime yet, but it's, I think you're talking, what I'm trying to get at is like, students all of a sudden they spend way more than a minute. Sometimes I see students spend up to like 5 minutes trying to get a question correct, when in fact, they may not even get that question correct and they're just hurting their chances of doing well on the other questions. So what I love to tell students is, do the ones that you know you can get right and are supposed to get right. Do those first. Knock those out. Make sure those are taken care of. Then and only then do you move on as progressively as you can to the ones you know you can get right, but might take more time. And really leave the most difficult ones, as you said, that are worth just as much as the ones you're supposed to get right, to the very end, right?
Well, they're just all the same. They count equally. So do what you do and don't get worried. Don't get freaked out if you get kind of like, forgot one, just, keep calm and keep going.
Yeah, and definitely realize that it's not about getting 60 out of 60 perfectly correct, right? It's about performing to the best of your ability. And if it's sometimes you're just gonna have to guess and be able to get an answer.
That's a really good point. It's not really built to be something that like straight A students get everything correct, which I think a lot of times they're used to, aren't we? So it's something that, don't get freaked out if you don't know an answer to something. That doesn't necessarily mean you won't get a good score. So
there's a question here for you, Sarah, about it feels a little loaded, but so I'll let you take this one. But it says they want to know if you think schools prepare students well for standardized tests. Is there a way you'd take that?
Well, certainly it depends on what you're talking about. There are schools that have different preparation programs. What I would encourage people who do those things is to look at the efficacy of those programs. Like, we know what works and things like that. So schools that actually take time to have high quality teachers who have high expectations, whose students are learning. Those are the schools that are preparing students not only to do well on standardized tests, but to do well, right? That's what's most important, is for students to really learn. So high engagement and taking challenging classes.
And then here's another loaded one, and thank you for that. This one says, the most recent data from the percentage of 36s went up 28% from there. I haven't seen this. This is actually a really interesting statistic. I don't know if you've seen this before, but is this something you'd speak to, or?
Yeah, so a lot of things are going on right now. I'm not sure about this particular finding, and that's, again, I'm in the test development area, so I'm talking about the design. There's some other things about the press and things like that, but we do know that a lot more students are taking the ACT than they used to. So there's a lot of people that are taking the ACT more than once than used to. So as the stakes go up and we see students doing those things, we see things, we have clarity. We also have more students, again, in states, when states pay for students to take the ACT, we get all kinds of kids taking the ACT that wouldn't normally have. So we have students that may have not thought that was a good idea, may not have spent their time, but when the state pays for it, we just have more students. With more students comes more top scorers. We definitely, again, it's excellent news. We want students that are highly prepared. So this is great news for us. The more 36s, the better.
Yeah, and I would just say also there's so many opportunities as a student now to get your hands on some real problems, right? And I know that's one of the things that you push for. Don't just study any topic, but really try to get to what exactly the ACT asks for you in specific topics. So I think that's also something that I've seen students really take advantage of as they prepare and get more comfortable with this test. Is that another?
Sure, and make sure you're answering the questions that is asked of you. Yeah, that sometimes people will jump and think they don't read it carefully. But yeah, again, again, the more active and engaged, the more you learn, the better it will be.
Awesome. Can I actually ask you to share? I teased a little bit about ACT cheating scandals I've heard, but can you talk a little bit about test security a little bit? You don't have to talk about the cheating in particular, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on test security and that topic at this stage.
Yeah, you have no idea. We spend a lot of our time, as you might imagine, on test security. So just so you know, to make sure that you know and feel good about you as a student, we have a lot of behind the scenes forensic, what we call forensic psychometrics that go on. After scores come in, we check and watch for things around a possible cheating, because if that's certainly, we don't want to have a situation where a student got a high score who didn't really earn that score. So it's really important to us to make sure that those things don't happen. We had the varsity blues that had to do with, I think SAT has some issues as well, and things in the paper about some different proctors. It seems like that. Well, we, again, do what we can to catch those. We were definitely involved in that being caught. We work with groups like the FBI. That is going on all the time. And so that was something that we may have known more about than perhaps others. But we definitely pay close attention and are watching. And when we know something's not right, people might have seen, for example, a score like a test center, and sometimes we've had a couple test centers closed down in some other countries. And that's because we found might be a problem, so we don't even allow it. So it's something that we take very seriously. Again, perhaps we watch it very, very carefully, perhaps more so than some others.
That makes a lot of sense. Here's a question from Emily. How do we convince students to take the ACT seriously when they do not plan to go to college? That's a really interesting one.
Yeah. So how can they use that score? What value can that score bring? And so I guess from my perspective, again, it's allowing students to try their hardest to see what areas are they interested in. There are reporting categories within each area. If they want to know more about what their strengths are in, maybe that does have to do, even though it might not be college, maybe they're interested in a particular career more so the one than the other. And that can give insight as to some of your strengths and weaknesses. So again, anything you can learn more about yourself and help you make decisions further in life, I think the better off you are.
That, yeah, I love that. I mean, that sounds really practical, and it sounds like exactly the way we'd want to just tell students again to better understand what they're getting themselves into and what doors it exactly opens. So I think so far I've heard a lot of different ways that students could use this information to just, the main takeaway from me from all of this is that you can absolutely improve on this test. And I'm hearing from you, because I think a lot of students kind of just resign themselves to the fact that, like, oh, I'm such and such type of student, I'm never going to do well on the ACT, or I'm just really bad at standardized test taking, so this is just not, like, it's fine. Like, but the reality is, if you take a look at this test a little bit more in terms of the nuts and bolts, if you understand what's being asked, if you understand that the concepts that are being tested are very practical, as you said, drawn from actual classrooms and really tied to readiness to get into college and be able to use those skills as a first-year student, this becomes a test that is a lot more real, if that's the word I'd use. It's a test that becomes a lot more than just throwing trick questions at you and trying to get you.
It's not an IQ test. It's not an aptitude test. It's definitely about achievement, and people can improve on their achievement.
Okay, I mean, I love that. I mean, to be honest, even as a test prep instructor, that gives me a lot more confidence to be able to tell students genuinely that this is more than just a test that they have to, suffer through, that this can be a test.
What?
That this can be a test that can really carry with them skills that they can use on tests moving forward as well, right? So
absolutely. And again, the time they spend learning this, hopefully they're not just spending it to do better on the ACT. They're spending the time on actual things, so they'll learn more and they'll do better on no matter what they do. So
that's really great, Sarah. Thank you. Oh, okay, we got another question coming in. I was actually about to wrap up, but if you have questions, continue to come in. Please keep them coming in. And so I think we've touched upon this already, but maybe you can just hammer this home. Do you believe the score is what defines the student's knowledge? And then maybe this may be a great way to just wrap everything up from your perspective, Sarah. Like, one more PSA, one more public service announcement to all the students out there.
I was a high school teacher that was not a big fan of standardized tests myself. Like I said, I didn't understand all this stuff, and it seemed like the formality raised everybody's anxiety. But now I understand all that is trying to do is level the playing field. So you do your best. As far as anxiety and things like that, the more you practice, like I said, the more you go through it, we know that the more the anxiety goes down. We don't want to measure your anxiety. We don't want you to be anxious. We want you to be calm and confident and know that the things that you learn in your classroom are going to pay off. The time you spend learning is going to pay off on this assessment. So as far as, there's no one score of anything that I think defines anything. This is one piece of data along with a lot of other things that people take into consideration when they make high stakes decisions. But want you all to do great. And wish you well. And like I said, we're here. We are all teachers here. We're all rooting for you to get the best score you can. So thanks for tuning in, and hope I answer some of your questions.
I love that, Sarah. Thank you so much. Guys, thank you for participating. Thank you for being here. This, I think, I'd love if you could just get in there and, as Sarah said, just do your best to improve. And so this is Sarah and Dennis signing off on today's session. Have a great rest of your day. And we hope to see you next time, and hope again that you will take the time to sign up for the ACT for December 14th. Remember, the deadline is November 8th without a late fee, and let us know how we can support you. You can sign up for prep on the ACT's website, and we can make sure you get access to those questions that make you as comfortable as possible when you go out to take your tests. So thank you again. Have a good one, and we will see you soon. Best of luck. Good night.